once I started seeing what other people were capable of, or maybe incapable of, I was able to see that like I wasn't really that incompetent on the scale of people. I have some experience they don't. Maybe they have experience I don't. But like I'm not unworthy of being here. Like I'm just as equal.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the BXcellent podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brandon Harrison Smith, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher here at Purdue University. On this podcast, what you can expect is to be introduced to Black professionals across varying stages of the career, where we share their stories, their research, and some of their advice on how you can be excellent. Now, today I have the honor of welcoming Dr. Monique McClain, an assistant professor here in the mechanical engineering department at Purdue University. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. So I wanted you to be here because not only you have an impressive resume and accomplishments here at Purdue, but you're also an alumni of Purdue University. So I feel like you have a lot of experience and information to give to our students here that want to be excellent. You are from San Diego?
Yes, that's correct. So all the way from California.
Okay. And did you feel like that was number one, why'd you make that transition between San Diego to Purdue? I feel like that's a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, I get this question a lot, but it's very valid. For me, I was very interested in a certain type of research.
Okay.
So pretty much rocket propulsion. And there are very few places to do that at a university level and to kind of get more in-depth knowledge and experience on that. So I was looking around and I was like, okay, well, this place, Purdue, sounds really cool. They have like multiple professors who work on that area. But of course, it's in Indiana. Mm-hmm. So I had to kind of decide, did I want to take that step to move into that career path, or did I want to try to find another option? Luckily, I was able to get accepted and find an advisor here. And it really was my top choice in terms of research. So it worked out. But yeah, it's definitely a big leap, you know, coming out here. So yeah.
But not so much of a leap because you were actively interested in rocket propulsion. So it was a great fit for you.
It was a great research fit.
Yes.
In terms of like the area and everything, that was very different than where I was from. Yep.
Okay. So how'd you get into rocket propulsion? I feel like it's pretty niche, pretty specific.
Yeah. So in my undergrad, we had a rocket propulsion club. Okay. So it was called the Triton Rocket Club. And I got involved with that my freshman year because I thought it sounded really cool. Mm-hmm. I've always also been inspired by like the chief engineer of Star Trek, the one who's like making the warp engine go. So I thought it'd be cool to like join a rocket club and work on the engine per se. So I joined that, and then I stayed with it for all 4 years. I really enjoyed it. So I was really trying to see if I could get into research related to that area.
Okay. So you weren't interested in it prior to college. It was not something on your list, but you did go into STEM like as a specific goal to yours, right?
Yeah. So I did know I wanted to do engineering. I applied to aerospace engineering literally because I like science fiction. And I thought it'd be cool. I could easily pick another engineering though. But yeah, I was interested in STEM. But in terms of getting into the rocket world, like that kind of happened over time.
Okay. So the nonfiction aspect, that's what inspired you to get into STEM? Or was there other elements there, like in your upbringing, that got you this?
So yeah, that's a good question. I think, in terms of the nonfiction side, I was lucky that in my family, for example, my mom always pushed STEM. So even though she was more like good at writing and she used to be an accountant and whatnot, she always pushed like you need to be good at both writing and STEM. So when I was really young, I think I was 8, I said, oh, I'm not good at math. And she's like, no, you will do it. And then over time I learned that, the reason why I thought I wasn't good at it is because like it was kind of more mental barrier for me rather than my ability. So I'm really happy that like she pushed me into kind of like, no, you need to be competent. Even if you don't go into that career path, like you still need to understand, like math, science, and those basics.
Yeah, I absolutely get that. I had the same experience from my own family members. I said I wasn't good at something. And they would give me such contradictory. It's like, if you're not good at something, it's okay, but you're not good at this.
Yep. Yeah, pretty much. So it's like no excuses. And I was also lucky that, like, for example, my dad, he's a medical, or like he's a surgeon. So
Okay.
like, that's a little different kind of STEM, but in general, like in my family, I've been kind of exposed a little bit in some sense to STEM, but I wasn't necessarily like pushed towards it, but.
Okay. All right. And so were there any challenges in your college experience or graduate experience that made you start to doubt yourself or doubt your path? And what were the strategies you employed to kind of get over those barriers?
Yeah, that could be more than
I know
time, but I'll try to summarize. When I went to UCSD, which is where I entered an aerospace engineering degree, which is like a combined department. It's aerospace and mechanical.
Sure.
I was pretty much like the only Black person in the classroom. So that was very overwhelming. And of course, there are a lot of men as well. So in the beginning, I was kind of thinking, the obvious kind of imposter syndrome, like, I don't know if I'll make it. We'll see. But at least in my mind, it wasn't the end of the world if I didn't, because I'm like, I have a backup plan. I could join another engineering or try some other field. But I think one thing that helped me get over that was once I started seeing what other people were capable of, or maybe incapable of, I was able to see that like I wasn't really that incompetent on the scale of people. So for example, I was like, okay, like I have some experience they don't, maybe they have experience I don't, but like I'm not unworthy of being here. Like I'm kind of just as equal in a sense. So I think for me is really just kind of understanding what was out there rather than being isolated and like internalizing all of that. But it did take time to do. I mean, that didn't happen overnight. That happened by, making friends from different groups, really trying to see what's going on out there, what opportunities they have that maybe I didn't at the time, and how do I get those opportunities as well. So there was definitely a learning curve, but I think that was kind of the biggest thing that helped me get through and then build confidence in myself. And over time, it paid off. It was at some point I was elected as president of the Trenton Rocket Club that I joined as a freshman. So that built confidence. People started coming to me, asking me questions about things. So over time, it paid off, but it was hard at first. It's like I had to learn how to put myself in these situations with different groups of people, no matter how uncomfortable I felt at first. In a sense.
But I imagine your upbringing with your mom being resilient with you, with like making sure you kept at math, even though you felt like you weren't good at it.
Mm-hmm.
So it caused you to move forward in a lot of cases where you may not have felt comfortable.
Yeah, she definitely made sure to socialize us. It's like if there's a, play the cello in front of people, an audience, or do things like that. Things like as a kid, you're like, oh, I really don't want to do it. But like later you look back and you're like, no, she's trying to teach you how to go into an environment you're not comfortable in and still succeed in a sense. So that definitely helped.
Yeah, I had those experiences in church. And it was like, who would like to read the scripture? And they were like, my son would.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. But I think those things helped a lot. And, I also grew up in a community where there aren't many Black people or anything. So it's like always kind of, being a minority that way. I mean, not just minority, but extra like physical location. So over time, I kind of learned like I have to reach out to people, even if it doesn't go well, but at least I tried kind of thing. So
that sounds good. All right. So we talked more about your undergrad experience. So for your grad experience, when you got here, obviously you picked a research that you were quite interested in.
Yep.
And Purdue is a fantastic place for that. Was there certain things that you weren't expecting to have challenges with when you got here?
Yeah. So there were some challenges in terms of some people I worked with. So in general, most of the people I worked with were very either helpful or kind of normal, not too antagonistic, but that wasn't always the case. So that was definitely something, and I won't go into details.
No, that's fine.
But that was challenging to go through and navigate, especially when like there weren't many other people going through the same thing. So that was something that I'm lucky it kind of resolved itself. But that I'm not going to lie, that was a very significant setback for me in the first 2 years
Yes.
I was here. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of times, I guess there's mental barriers. And those mental barriers is sometimes dealing with people or dealing with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So you already tackled on like dealing with the imposter syndrome stuff, which is like more of an internalized thing, right? And then there's some people just working environments as well. Yeah, and that can be definitely pretty challenging. And luckily for you, those things resolved itself.
Yeah, and you know, again, like I don't think the person was trying to be intentional, but I do think the way I was treated was not the best. So
yeah, people come from different environments, and certain things are acceptable, and certain things are not.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so lucky for us, you were able to get through it because now you are an assistant professor here at Purdue University, and fairly new. So what has that experience been like? It's probably got to be surreal going from a master's student to a PhD student to now you're an active assistant professor here at your alma mater.
Yeah, you're right. It was, well, now I'm a little more in the swing of things, but it definitely was surreal when I started. It's kind of like, I still know people or have friends who are, you know, getting their degrees. And then now I'm trying to make professor friends and I'm trying to figure out how everything works. So yeah, it was definitely kind of overwhelming. But at the same time, it was nice knowing that I understood some basics here. I had already had, you know, allies in a sense. So like people who are mentors and people who advocate for me here. So that's nice knowing that I'm not entirely alone. But yeah, it's definitely been very interesting experience, but it's going well so far, I think.
All right. That sounds great. So you just hinted on mentors. Who is the most, or who are your mentors? And let me not out anybody because I'm pretty sure you have many mentors, right? So who are your mentors and why, how are they impactful in your life and in your progression through your career?
Yeah. So actually my former advisor is still a mentor to me. He's always been a great advocate for me in terms of making sure like I'm aware of certain things I should apply for, or like, you know, you should just submit that, or like, you know, kind of push me out of my comfort zone in the sense of like, you are worthy of applying for these things, or making sure I'm aware of resources. I've had other faculty like that as well. So like some at Zucra where I work now have also been supportive in that way. And even in my department now, which, you know, I'm learning more people or meeting more people in that area, some of them there have also been very helpful. Like they might give me advice on something particularly challenging, or just kind of general advice about, you know, focus more on the big picture, not necessarily the struggle of tenure kind of thing. Like think about who you want to be. So like those have all been helpful. And even just, for example, like the Faculty of Color Network I've become a part of, just meeting some faculty across campus in different areas. You know, it's always nice to have that connection, right? You know, we could talk about other things that maybe aren't necessarily academic focused, but are still important in terms of mentorship, or just, you know, blowing off steam maybe. So
absolutely. Mentorship. I think I remember reading in your CV that you're actively, that's something that you're interested in.
Yeah.
Mentoring. Like what does mentoring do for you? Why do you like mentorship so much?
Yeah, I think when I reflect back on all the people who've helped me in my career, they've really connected me to the right resources or advocated for me and helped me get on my journey. So like they didn't necessarily tell me like, you need to go this way, this path. It was more like, let me learn about you as a person and let me help connect you with what you need. So I found that really valuable, and I like to reciprocate that for people. So really, when I think about mentoring people, I think about, okay, like what could benefit you potentially? Like, or do you know about these resources? Or do you know how this system works in a sense? Because I find, like, for example, grad school application process, a lot of people don't understand 100% how that works. And I think it's a shame because if you don't understand how it works, how can you perform as well as other people who do? So I think kind of just making sure people have the right information, the right access is important in terms of mentorship. And then also trying to help them grow as people and, you know, future leaders. So
absolutely. So I think that's really important that you hinted on, is the fact that this is not an individual process. This is a group effort, so to speak. And you probably wouldn't be as far as long without the group support, you know, your parents, your advisors, or other connections that you have made. Those have definitely steered you in the direction of your success.
Yeah.
I think that's something that students sometimes lose sight of.
Mm-hmm.
It's all a group effort. Studying for an exam, it's not you against everyone else all the time.
Exactly. Yep.
And then, so you're an assistant professor right now. My question circles back to imposter syndrome. Do you feel like that ever goes away? Do you feel like you get to a point and you're like, I don't have imposter syndrome anymore?
I think I go through phases of it.
Mm-hmm.
And probably it's not so surprising. Like when I start a new role, I have it more. But then at some point, I'm like, okay, I'm doing all right. I'm making it through. So, for me, I think it comes and goes, but it will always be there in some form, I think, at some point.
The reason I want to talk about that is I think so many times it gets to these phases and we're like, oh, imposter syndrome should go away now. Mm-hmm. Like I'm in this role now. I'm no longer a PhD student. I'm no longer an undergraduate student. No more imposter syndrome. But imposter syndrome exists always. Yep. I imagine when you become anything new, a new mother, a new father, different stages of your life, you're going to feel somewhat like an imposter. And it's just something to kind of get through and not something to deter you from moving forward in your career.
Yep.
Okay. So a little bit more about your research. So I've read some of your articles. You don't just work on just propulsion-based research, right? You're working on 3D printing things as well. Can you speak more about that? Like what kind of questions as a researcher you're trying to answer?
Yeah. So we're trying to answer several types of questions. So in general, like one that doesn't have anything to do with propulsion, but is focused on 3D printing is how do you implement quality control on what you make? So for example, if you 3D print the exact same part with the exact same settings multiple times on the same printer or even different printers, will it turn out the same each time?
No.
Exactly. And the question is, why would it not turn out the same? So it's like, is there an issue somewhere in the process that could be affecting that? So is there something causing like warping or some stringing or some other anomaly? So I think that's really important to understand, because if you can't make the same thing repeatedly, reliably, and understand its general properties, it's going to be really hard to actually use it for certain applications. At this point, it will mostly just be for fun. But even for people who use it for fun, it's frustrating trying to make a part and then it just won't work, right? So
absolutely. And is that what you're primarily focused on right now, or are you working on some other things as well?
Yeah, so we work on other things. We work on 3D printing energetic materials. So that would be things like solid rocket propellant. So something like in a space shuttle booster, for example, or some explosives. Okay. So yeah, things that go boom. But it's a relatively new research area, and we really don't understand how 3D printing affects their overall properties. So we don't understand how 3D printing affects how they burn. We don't understand, for example, if we're trying to 3D print it, like we might need to use a new mixture in order to 3D print that compared to like traditional materials that were not really made with 3D printing in mind. So there's kind of a lot of different questions in that space without going into too many crazy details. We're really trying to understand how to 3D print those materials, how 3D printing affects those materials, essentially.
Okay. So my next question is, how soon should undergrads or people who are interested in this type of research, how soon should they try to actively get involved in it? When would you advise that for them?
Yeah, so I think it's always good to start early. So even if you're a first year student and you don't necessarily get, the opportunity, I wouldn't say you should stop. You should always try, because you never know who's open-minded to letting young people in. But definitely, earlier the better, or even just kind of understanding more what they do or learning about your options, I think is important. Or learning how to apply or what opportunities there are. Like, for example, there are programs like SURF, so like it would be good to know early, like, oh, okay, this program exists that pays me to do research at many different institutions, right? So maybe I can work on applying for that next year or something. Or like now I can maybe volunteer in a lab. So to gain experience. So there's lots of different options, but I would definitely say earlier is better in terms of like kind of getting on people's radar. And then coming back,
Yeah. To your point, some people are very open to letting young
Mhm.
minds into the lab, and some people are not.
True. Yeah.
So, are there any suggestions or strategies you would advise those students to kind of like still get the experience that they might need to get involved in this area?
Yeah. So I would recommend, if possible, trying to join some sort of project-based organization or club, or maybe if you have a hobby you're dedicated to, like working on that, because that shows to me that you have dedication to something, or you want to learn something new, and you're developing basic
Or
skills.
building the club yourself.
Or that too, exactly.
Right.
So, for example, like I get a lot of students who've been in Purdue Space Program, because they tend to be interested in rocketry and whatnot. There are other clubs like, I think there's a 3D printing club or a prosthetics club, but you don't have to necessarily be in a club. Some students have their own 3D printers and they make their own parts, or maybe there's some other like design project you can make, for example. But that shows me that you're trying to build up skills, or maybe learning how to code. That's always something that could be done early rather than waiting to do that in a lab. And that will kind of build your resume and also give you some experience like when you're starting to join research.
Absolutely. I find it that sometimes some things could be like also not just approaching the professor cold turkey,
Yep.
reading some of their research papers,
Yep.
showing that you've done a little bit of research of your own.
Yes.
And you're not just approaching them saying, hey, I think I saw something cool. Can I join your lab? Say like, hey, I read your paper.
Yep.
And even in saying that you didn't understand something, I think that's important too, because now you're driving conversation and you might be building connection between you and that professor. I think that's just very extremely important that you can start early and there's different options.
Yep.
There might be some roadblocks, this professor might be difficult, but there's ways that you can kind of like break down some of those barriers.
Mhm.
Now, that's the knowledge-based thing. What kind of skills would you say that the students need to learn to get into your area? Would you say like, hey, take some SolidWorks, like online free courses, or what would you advise?
Yeah. So in general, CAD will not do you wrong because that's used in a lot of different engineering disciplines. I think coding is really important to start learning. So things like how to use Python, maybe MATLAB, or maybe things like GitHub, because that's also like becoming more common, right?
Absolutely.
So when I was a student, that was barely used, right? But now it's very common. So kind of learning those basics would be important. And then, like, for example, in my field, like learning basics of like 3D printing design. So like, how do you make something you can 3D print, or learning about the different types of 3D printing methods? Because there's many different types of methods out there, just kind of getting basic understanding of that. And then for energetics, it's okay if you have not burned or worked with solid rocket propellant before. I don't expect that kind of experience. But it is maybe a little useful to think a little bit about maybe some material science, like think about like polymers and particles, or maybe think about how a rocket motor burns. Like there's propulsion classes. So like there's different options that people can kind of focus on, I would say.
Okay. So we're about to wrap up a little bit, but before we get to like my wrap up piece, I'd like to ask you, what are some keys or key advice that you would like to give people behind you, whether it be graduate students or undergrads? What kind of like advice would you give them to be successful?
Yeah, I think something that has worked a lot for me, I'm the type of person who likes to gather information and compile it in my brain before I proceed, in a sense. And I found that's been very helpful for me. So for example, like, before I contact a professor, I do the homework, I figure out like what they do. I, when I contact them, I'm like, these are my skills and I think this will relate to this project, things like that. Or if I'm writing a proposal or a paper, I'm thinking, okay, like, what do you need? How can I solve that? So I would just say like kind of doing your homework and being strategic in how you pitch yourself is important. So, think about the other person's perspective. Like, what are you bringing them in a sense? But
so
of
like
course,
strategizing.
Yeah, exactly. Strategizing. Right. So, and it's not to say that you yourself don't have value. You should get value from that experience, but you should be clear and to the point about, or make a good case for why you are a good fit, or why this is the opportunity for you, or things like that. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what kind of strengths does one need to be successful?
Yeah, wow, that's a lot.
I know.
Yeah.
This is something I'm going to ask everybody, and I'm expecting everyone has varying answers, but
Yeah.
you don't have to necessarily, like, what's a strong candidate for you?
I really value teamwork because I think in many settings, at least in engineering settings, you will be working with people. So that means you have to communicate, you have to coordinate. You can't just be talking to a few people and not keeping everyone else in the loop.
So effective communication. Because some
Exactly.
people are like, I communicate. I talk on the phone all the time.
No,
But
you have to make sure everyone's on the same page and it's clear. Sometimes that means you have to change your communication style to make sure everyone's on the same page. To me, that's really, really important. Or just also thinking about how do you pass on knowledge to the next set of people, or how do you streamline things? Because no one wants to reinvent the wheel many, many times, right? So how can we make it kind of easy for everyone to be on the same page? So instead of oh, I have to learn how to do this whole procedure again because no one wrote it down or no one wrote it clearly or didn't document it. At least it's like, no, we have it here. Here's the procedure. It's like kind of being a responsible engineer in a sense, right? Like, how do you kind of maintain functionality or system like that actually works?
Your ability to communicate that information shows, that you really understand that information.
Yeah.
And I was actually a tutor when I was in undergrad, and for me that was the challenge because I understood the information, but I couldn't explain it to anyone. And so I found that I really mastered the subject when I could effectively communicate it to anybody at any level.
Yes, exactly. So that's really important. So
yes. All right. As we end this podcast, I'd like for you to say anything you want to say to like undergrad students or graduate students who might be interested in the research or interested in approaching you. I know sometimes it can feel challenging to just walk up to a professor who teaches you and you're just like, hey, I'm interested in your research. So what could they do to reach out to you? What's the appropriate time to reach out to you as well?
Yeah. So in general, I do respond to my email, but give me some time to respond because I don't want to just send kind of a meaningless response. I do want to send something more meaningful. So if you're asking for an opportunity a certain semester and I don't have openings in, I want to be like, okay, we'll try again later, or talk to me about this other program or whatnot. So in general, I do respond to that. Or some people have gone, I try to do social events too. So maybe I'm invited to a new faculty and ME panel, that's an opportunity to talk to me, or if there's a mixer or something with students. And you don't have to pitch it hard to me. It's just kind of who are you as a person? What are your goals? And is there an alignment here potentially? So.
Absolutely. And I think that alignment is key. You know, a lot of people start talking and they give you their life story.
Yep.
And you're like, where is this going?
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of even if you love the research I do, for example, it's not always a good working professional relationship. It's important to have a good match, right? You need to match with an advisor who will match your style, right? Or your needs, right? They'll help you in what you need. So don't be so set on a specific project. Be open to opportunities. And then be open to different types of mentors.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there might be more growth in a particular project for you. Sometimes if you're, especially as a PhD, you might like this project, but there might not be enough growth for you to pitch it as a full PhD, defense. So you definitely want to be a bit more flexible, and you just really have no idea how life is going to kind of spread out for you. And so the more exposure, more experience that you're collecting within these things can be very helpful. So your email is the best place to reach you, I guess. And at these events, don't be afraid to approach you.
Yep. And I forgot to mention sometimes my LinkedIn. So.
Okay. Yes. Your LinkedIn is very accessible. That's where I've read all your information that I prepared for to you today.
Yeah, I do check that. So.
Okay.
But again, give me time.
Okay. Yes. And so with that, we will end the podcast. Until next time, be excellent. Thank you for listening to our podcast, and stay tuned next time where we bring you more Black professionals who share their experience and give their sage wisdom on your road to being excellent. Until next time, thank you.